across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, I'm Peter Cardwell. This is Talk. Thank you so much for your company. I'm here between now and 12:30 today. Loads to talk about. We've got the Veterans Minister coming up. And if you're a veteran, or if you're someone who cares about veterans and worries about them and worries about what's happening in our country to veterans, well, I want to hear from you. I want to make sure we get as many questions from you to the Veterans Minister, as well as the ones I have up my sleeve as well. 0344 499 1000. Al Carns, who is the new Veterans Minister, he's a veteran himself. He was in the Special Boat Service. He got the Military Cross for his gallantry. He is now a Labour politician. He will be joining us in about an hour's time. So let me know your questions for him. We've got the debate desk as well, and plenty to debate today, including migrants facing curbs on using the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, to avoid deportation, foreign criminals and failed asylum seekers facing an immigration crash, disability benefits crackdown. We're going to talk to Emma Lewell-Buck, the Labour MP for South Shields, about that in a second, and about the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill. That is something that Emma Lewell-Buck is working on as well. The UK area where 43% of people don't speak English. This is something that I'm really quite concerned about, and we're asking today, how important is it, you think, for immigrants to speak English? Let us know your thoughts on all of that. We're talking about two-tier justice as well. Shabna Mahmood, who is the Justice Secretary, says that this idea that if your ethnicity or a disability or being trans or gay or whatever should mean that that's taken into consideration in terms of your sentence. She thinks that should go. She's written to the Independent Sentencing Council saying they shouldn't do what they want to do, but a bill that Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, has put forward, well, that's been blocked by Labour. Why? We'll talk about that as well. We'll also talk about America and Elon Musk appearing to endorse Rupert Lowe in the civil war in Reform UK. He's had a massive beef, as we know, over the past 10 days or so with Nigel Farage. Well, let us know your thoughts on any of that. This is my show, but your show too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get your voice on the air. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. And remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please, and we'll play those out. A voice note can be sent to the main number, as can a WhatsApp text message, and you can give me a ring for a live discussion on the air. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, plenty to discuss this morning. Let's go straight to Emma Lewell-Buck, MP. She's a Labour MP for South Shields. Emma, thank you very much for joining me on the programme this morning. How are you?
Morning, Pete. Grand, thank you.
I just want to ask you about what's on the front page of the Times. 1 million people to have disability benefits cut by Labour. The Chancellor vowing to get a grip on the welfare bill. Is this something you will be happy to vote for as a Labour MP, for people who get benefits to have at least some of those benefits taken away from them?
Well, as it stands at the minute, Peter, we don't actually know what the proposals are. We're hearing that the proposals will be, announced to the House of Commons at some point next week, hopefully. But as it stands yet, this is all speculation. There is no concrete proposals being put before MPs. So to ask whether we would vote on it or not is kind of a moot point, because we don't know what we're being asked to vote for yet. What I would say is that I have made representations to the government around my feelings about any tightening of eligibility, because studies have shown that from 2010, when eligibility was restricted for benefits, it didn't increase employment of people with disabilities and long-term health conditions. And the OBR said it did never make the savings that they predicted it would. What it did lead to, though, was 600 suicides, increased poverty, and a strain on the NHS and other public services. So that is not something that I could support.
So presumably your position, I mean, we are talking hypotheticals, and I totally get it. I totally get you don't know the detail of this, but yeah, it certainly looks as if that the government is not happy with the fact that at the moment, the benefits bill is something like 70 billion. The OBR, you mentioned it there, said it could go up to something like 100 billion. I mean, the government wants to cut that benefits bill in some way. What is a reasonable way to do that, or is there a reasonable way to do that, Emma?
Well, last year we introduced getting Britain Working green paper, which was a really positive step, because I've been unemployed before myself, and I've never met anybody who is out of work who doesn't want to work if they can. And that paper was setting the groundwork for that. We've got an industrial strategy that's not going to report until the spring. And we've also got massive reforms to the NHS, which will help those people who are on waiting lists and in long-term sick get the healthcare they need and get back to work. But I think until those things kick in, we shouldn't be looking at taking money off anyone who needs that to survive. Now, there's been lots of talk around PIP benefits. PIP is not an out-of-work benefit. It's an in-work benefit. People on PIP use that money to help them get to work. If you remove that, you're actually going to increase the unemployment figures. So that, to me, doesn't make any sense.
I mean, you're talking in a way that I would imagine Liz Kendall, Keir Starmer, many others in the government wouldn't be hugely happy with. Do you think that you're likely to be a rebel? I mean, it's interesting you're saying, OK, we don't know exactly what the proposals are, but there's a lot of noise around this. There's a lot of preparing the ground. And in a couple of weeks' time, it's not going to be Rachel Reeves saying, I'm going to massively uprate benefits. They're going to be cut, aren't they?
Well, I don't know. And, I wouldn't class myself as a rebel. I'm pretty sensible. I look at what's before me and I make a decision. But I think my record in Parliament shows that I always do what's best for my constituents, and I will always put them first above everything. And I have a lot of constituents who are on disability benefits. I cannot look, they're my friends, my family and my community. I cannot look them in the eye if I'm going to make them poorer. It's not something I could do.
Who's more important to them, those people you just mentioned there, or being loyal to the Labour whips?
Well, I think always, again, if you look at my record, I have always put my constituents first. I've been their MP for 12 years now. This is my home. These are the people who will always come first to me. I'm a Labour MP because I believe very strongly in Labour values, and I think we are doing good stuff, bearing in mind the terrible legacy that we got left. But when it comes to an issue like this is not something I would be able to look into the eyes of those people who I live with and who are my community, my neighbours, family and friends, and say, I have voted to make you poorer. I couldn't do that.
Rob has been in touch and says, my brother is 52. He has the mental capacity of a 3-year-old. I'm very concerned about how the benefits changes will affect him. Please ask the Labour MP whether people with disabilities like my brother will be included in these changes, says Rob. I mean, we just don't know at the moment, Rob. But Emma, I'm sure people like Rob's brother are people you're concerned about.
Absolutely, and that's why I've also been pushing to make sure that any changes that are announced are accompanied with an impact assessment. And also some of these changes will need statutory consultation, so we could be a long way off them anyway. So it's about making sure that everyone feeds into any consultation that comes out, making sure there's an impact assessment that accompanies any changes. And also in the meantime, myself and other MPs are proposing other ways where we could, instead of taking money away from people who need it and people who need that money to survive, we're saying let's look at other options. Let's look at perhaps, ending the stealth subsidy on banks, which is costing the taxpayer up to £7 billion per year. There's other options out there. So it's a work in progress.
Okay. You've been unemployed. I've been unemployed. I know what it's like. I lost my job 3 times before I was 30. Tell me a little bit from your perspective about how we get people back to work. You're saying you've never met an unemployed person who doesn't want to work if they can. How should the government actually look at this and tackle the problem? Because I would argue it's not easy, but it's more straightforward to cut benefits and to say, well, people should get back to work than actually helping them back to work in some way. What responsibility does the state have, and how much do you think it's realistic to get people back to work, especially when there are so many pressures in the economy, Emma?
But like I referred to before, we introduced our Get Britain Working paper last year. That was really positive. And alongside that, our health sec is making sure that those who are waiting on hospital waiting lists for appointments that could get them back into work, that they're fast-tracked. So we're already doing some of that groundwork there. These are good policies.
Tell me, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned there just a second ago about not voting to take money away from people. Am I right in saying you abstained on the winter fuel allowance?
Yes, I
Why didn't you just
abstained.
vote against it?
Well, because you'll know yourself, Peter, that in Parliament you're presented with a motion. and you either vote for that motion in its entirety or you vote against it. That motion was saying, let's take the winter fuel off everybody. And, you know, my view was that it shouldn't come off everybody. It should just come off the wealthiest who didn't need it.
Did you table an amendment?
No, I didn't table an amendment, no. But, you know, again, in the run-up to it, myself and others were making representations to the government, and my view in the end was that those who didn't need it shouldn't have had it, but that those who did need it, the pension threshold should have been the taper for the pension threshold should have been increased, because at the minute it stands at, I think, £12,000.
But you can understand, Emma, you can understand. Okay, you can understand, Emma, why people might just say, why not just vote against it, taking money, you mentioned earlier on, you want to take money away from vulnerable constituents. I mean, surely by voting against this, you could have made a really big stand on it.
Well, by voting against it, I would have been saying that I was also happy for the motion that said that I was also happy for wealthy people to still get it, and I wasn't.
Okay, so you want to make your point in a different way. Tell us, you're a member of the Defence Select Committee. We've got your colleague, Al Carns, on a little bit later on. I just wonder, in regard to putting peacekeeping troops into Ukraine, if that were to happen, do you think we're ready for that?
Well, I think those discussions are ongoing, aren't they? I think Keir Starmer's meeting with lots of heads of state today to try and discuss what those security guarantees would look like. So I think until we see what comes out of those discussions, we don't know.
Okay. You are working yourself on the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Tell us about that and why it is so important. Something we've covered in protection of children is something our viewers and listeners care about an awful lot, particularly when it comes to grooming gangs, or more accurately, rape gangs, as we should call them. And I mean, the Conservatives absolutely, for the last 18 months after those recommendations from the report, did absolutely nothing about it. But Labour still are waiting to implement those recommendations. Surely they should do that more quickly.
Well, we've took action on that where the previous government didn't. They sat on those recommendations for years. We're pushing forward with that already. We're trying to implement those recommendations as quick as possible.
Sure, and tell me about the rest of the bill and why it's so important. I read an article by you in your local newspaper. Just tell us a little bit more about what your views are.
Well, I mean, for me, the provision to introduce school breakfast clubs is something that I've campaigned on for a very long time. I introduced the school breakfast bill many years ago now, so it's good to see that that's going to be in legislation. I've put down some amendments to strengthen it, to make sure that it applies to all SEND schools as well, and to make sure that if any school in the future wants to opt out of that school breakfast provision, that they have alternative provision, that they can show the Secretary of State that they will be ensuring that children get the very best start to their school day.
Excellent stuff. Emma, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. That's Emma Lewell-Buck there. She's the MP for South Shields for Labour, also a member of the Defence Select Committee. And we're talking about veterans today. We're talking to Emma's party colleague Al Carns a little bit later on. He's a very interesting and very untypical Labour MP, actually. He was due to be a brigadier, actually, and would have been one of the youngest brigadiers in the army. He served in the Special Boat Service. He's now the Veterans Minister. What questions do you think I should put to him a little bit later on? Let me know your thoughts on that, especially if you are a veteran, if you're worried perhaps about these benefits changes. He said some quite interesting things on this, not exactly singing from the same hymn sheet as the rest of the Labour Party. As the government prepares to reform that very welfare state's disability benefit system, many veterans will be feeling anxious about what this could mean for them, says Alistair Carns. Our veterans have served their country. Receiving the benefits and compensation they are owed should not be another battle they have to fight. Speaking of battles that are being fought, Keir Starmer is talking to quite a number of different people, NATO, Canada and various other countries, in regard to this coalition of the willing in regard to Ukraine. Keir Starmer has said Vladimir Putin will sooner or later have to come to the table, as he urged world leaders to keep up the pressure on Russia for an unconditional ceasefire. So he's already been talking within that virtual call, and I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a bit more from the Prime Minister later today. We'll keep you right up to date on all of that, and the readiness of our troops is something that I'm going to talk to Al Carns about as well. So let me know your thoughts on that and anything else. We've got the debate desk in a second. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
We had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, you know, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Brad in Cambridge has been in touch and says, "Morning, Peter. If these changes are aimed at getting people back to work, will people who are retired and in receipt of PIP due to disability still get it?" I think they will, Brad, but we'll see what the proposals actually are. As Emma Lewell-Buck, I mean, she made a really reasonable point, actually. We don't know, and what's happening at the moment, this happens, every government does it, all politicians do it. They're floating a test balloon at the moment. They're putting a few things out in the public domain to see what sticks and what doesn't, and if there's a hugely bad reaction to certain things, they won't do it. That's how politics works in this country. It shouldn't, but it does. We'll get all the detail, actually, on the debate desk with Theo Usherwood, and Peter Barnes is with us as well. We'll come to them in just a second, but I just want to read out a couple more messages here. Sean says the benefit system in this country is a disgrace. Labour will never do the necessary to get it under control, as it relies heavily on benefits claimants and benefit scroungers for its votes. That's Sean in Bridlington. Stephen says, how did the MP you spoke to vote on the winter fuel allowance? She abstained on that one. I did ask her about that. Leslie asked that question as well. Wayne in Nottinghamshire says, surely the Equalities Act makes it illegal to treat people with protected characteristics such as race, sex, gender, ethnicity. Why don't we enforce this in regard to sentencing? Well, we are going to talk about that a little bit later on as well. Steve says, if you've no English, you should get no benefits. They'll soon pick up the basics. And Richard in Shrewsbury says, Kursk has just been regained by Russian forces, and Ukrainian soldiers are currently surrendering en masse, a complete and inevitable military debacle once Ukrainian forces failed in their primary objective to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant. Neither the US nor Russia support Zelensky remaining in place, as he is now the main obstacle to a peace settlement, probably based on the 2022 Istanbul Accord, says Richard in Shrewsbury. Well, at this exact moment, Keir Starmer is on a video call at the moment with various leaders from Canada, from France, from various countries, as well as NATO and other international organisations. So when we get, we know that he has said that Vladimir Putin will, as he puts it, sooner or later have to come to the table, as urging world leaders, Starmer urging world leaders to keep up the pressure on Russia for an unconditional ceasefire. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear more from the Prime Minister as the day goes on. But let's talk about the big issue that is, we should just say, actually he's just said, I've just been told that he's told world leaders to keep the pressure on Putin for an unconditional ceasefire. Let's talk about that just a little bit on the debate desk with Theo Usherwood and Peter Barnes. Great to have you both with us this morning, political commentators both, and Peter's a political strategist as well. Tell us, Theo, how important Keir Starmer is at the moment in all these discussions in regard to Ukraine, do you think?
Well, as far as Europe's concerned, he is important, and the Prime Minister has made a great play of trying to put himself front and centre of the coalition of the willing. He held that summit in Lancaster House a couple of weeks ago. Him and Emmanuel Macron absolutely adamant that they would be prepared to put peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine should it be deemed necessary, but of course they want that backstop, that security backstop from the United States. But in the wider picture of where we find ourselves right now, the Prime Minister's statement says it all. The ball is in Putin's court. He needs to decide to come to the table and negotiate with primarily Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. So, yes, Keir Starmer is trying to cement his position amongst European leaders, but the real negotiations, the ones that really matter, are between Donald Trump, his team in the US administration, and of course Moscow and Putin's team representing Russian interests.
Peter, where are we with this, do you think?
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm just going to echo what Theo said, that Starmer is positioning himself amongst European leaders, but in reality, what is he actually achieving? This coalition of the willing, it doesn't seem to be having a lot of willing people. A lot of these nations...
Well, there's quite a few members of it.
There's a few members, but what are they actually going to contribute? I mean, like, obviously Poland...
But they don't know what they'd be contributing for yet. We don't know about peacekeeping troops yet or not.
We're all still very vague on the details, when everyone seems to be making the right noises, but with only France and ourselves willing to put boots on the ground, openly stating that, I mean, it's somewhat of a kick in the teeth for Starmer in terms of his actual ability to deliver on something. But I will say he's played this pretty well from a kind of PR perspective, and I think he's looking like he's important, but let's be real, Donald Trump will just ignore him if necessary. He's somewhat of an irrelevancy to the grander scheme and the grander negotiations that are happening. I mean, one thing I do find very interesting is the rise of Saudi Arabia and how they have become the country to which these negotiations are happening. I think that's a really important aspect that a lot of people haven't really talked about. But where we are.
I mean, it's interesting that the Saudis are saying that they're a place you can do business, they're a place you can do political business, but of course they have a horrendous human rights record.
Yeah.
They're not leaders in many respects, but there are so many people who seem to be capitulating to them and saying, well, actually we'll go along with what they want us to do and we'll use them as a facilitator.
Yeah, that's true, but let's not forget that we're about to enter what's going to look like a kind of wartime era, and we need oil. So it wouldn't surprise me if that plays a major factor in being a little nicer to petrostate nations such as, say, Qatar or, say, Saudi Arabia, where we're going to need a friendlier relationship with them if they suddenly start to hike up the price of oil.
Yeah, they're also crucial, of course, in what comes out of the Middle East and trying to resolve that conflict there. Mohammed bin Salman is, the Crown Prince, is known to be on close terms with Jared Kushner, the President Trump's son-in-law. They negotiate. Let's not make no bones about it. Saudi Arabia has a horrendous human rights record. I saw, one day they executed something like 81 people. Of course, we know what happened to the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, was chopped up in an embassy. So we can't. There's no way of trying to pretend that Saudi Arabia is some sort of forward-thinking modern nation. There are parts of its practices in terms of just delivering justice which are medieval, but you're right to point out, of course, they have positioned themselves as real power brokers in all of this. I just find it fascinating. What starts with hosting a couple of boxing fights, then moves on to having a new Saudi Pro League featuring Cristiano Ronaldo, ends up with holding the most consequential peace talks of the 21st century. I mean, it's quite the meteoric rise.
You have to look at Qatar hosting the World Cup, for example. Was this part of a kind of scheme or kind of plan to kind of bring these nations in as a kind of peace broker because of the geopolitical situation?
Okay, really interesting. The conversation went off in a direction I wasn't necessarily expecting it to, but that's the beauty of speaking to people like you. We're going to talk more about the benefit system in a second, because this is the big political issue, the big problem, I think, for Labour over the next couple of weeks. We've got the spring statement coming up, a sort of mini budget essentially from Rachel Reeves. We'll see what's in that. We'll see what sort of cuts to benefits, and lots of people very, very much worrying about that and getting in touch with us on that. Lots on veterans as well. Rob says, everybody seems vulnerable or disabled in this weird world we live, where so many don't seem to be able to care for themselves. On veterans, and we'll talk about that on the debate desk as well, Amanda in London says, morning Peter, this country needs to take a leaf out of America's book on how they respect their veterans. The problem in the UK stems from the loss of patriotism, which results in the appalling way our veterans are treated. Well, we do have the Veterans Minister live in just after the debate desk, actually, so not too long a time, and if you have some thoughts on what I should ask him, by all means, let me know. 0344 499 1000. We're also asking the question today, how important is it for you that immigrants speak English? This is because there is a district, an area of the United Kingdom where 43% of people don't speak English. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about benefits and whatever else you want to talk about between now and 12:30 here on Talk. And the number, if you want to get involved, 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch, especially on veterans. Claire says, as soon as the state gets into trouble, it turns its attention to the citizens of this country, either to the tax-paying citizens or the unemployed or pensioners if things get tight. I'm all for people losing benefits if they're doing so unduly and playing the system. But when we are paying inducements for illegal migrants to come to this country and giving them freebies like driving lessons and allocations to amusements, then suddenly this smacks of more two-tier initiatives in our two-tier country. Well, Theo Isherwood and Peter Barnes are still with me. Theo, maybe with your sort of political correspondent hat on, you could just take us through what is in the air at the moment and what's likely to actually happen, because we don't have concrete proposals in regard to what could change in the benefit system, but there's a lot around, isn't there?
There is a lot around. The focus seems to be on disability benefits, and particularly disability benefits for those who are the most disabled. And what the Chancellor needs to do, she saw her fiscal, her headroom wiped out because of the higher costs of government borrowing over the course of the new year. Actually, they were high again. The 10-year yield on gilts was high last week as well, approaching 5%. So the Chancellor needs to find a lot of cash. Now, she can do that by breaking her fiscal rules, and she's prepared. She's said she's absolutely adamant that she's not prepared to do that because she doesn't want a negative reaction from the markets again. She could, of course, increase taxes, but we know that we had that 40 billion hike last November, at the end of October, I should say, and that went down so badly with so many businesses, and they've promised not to increase taxes on working people. So now she's looking at spending cuts, and the focus is on the benefits bill and a saving of around £5 billion. Now, the Times has got a really interesting story, actually, where front page, Chancellor vows to get a grip on the welfare bill. And actually, when you look at it, they're focusing, as I said, on those who are deemed unfit to do any work and are now currently paid more than £800 a month. So under the changes that are being proposed, if you need help to wash your hair or your body below your waist, but you would not meet the new threshold, only those who need help washing their upper body are going to need help. So they're making the criteria much stricter. If you can use a microwave, you're not going to receive, but you can't cook, but you can use a microwave. You're now no longer going to, under these proposals, going to receive the higher rate of disability benefits. It's all done on a points-based system. So points means entitles you to benefits. And the more points the less you can do for yourself, the more points you get, the higher the benefit you get.
Do we think this is going to just be for new people getting PIP, or do you think people affecting people they'll reassess? This will is going to affect all. Or you will have to go through reassessments, and you will be reassessed, and then you will have to. Okay.
And this is a political row that is going to blow up for Keir Starmer.
Well, I mean, speaking to Emma,
fury on the Labour benches.
Emma Lewell-Buck, who was talking to me a few minutes ago, it doesn't sound as if she's going to vote for this.
Well,
Peter.
this is the big thing, because we're already seeing cabinet divisions. So there was rumours coming out of Number 10 just the other day that there are people willing to quit on the basis of who.
Oh,
this
there are
was
definitely people on resignation watch.
I mean, there was a straw poll of there was expected a minimum of an 88 rebellion. But if we look at this on the back of the farmers, the WASPy women, there's the potential of 30,000 job losses through the scrapping of NHS England. You've got the foreign aid where we've already lost Annalise Dobbs. Winter fuel allowance, the NI and national insurance hike. There's a lot of displeasure on the back benches of the Labour Party, and it's going to. This is a real political challenge. But let's be real. This isn't Starmer getting tough. This is Starmer having to do something, because after a £40 billion tax raid, he took that money and frittered it away. He's having to do this because he's not got the money, because his economic policies have not delivered any growth. In fact, the economy has shrunk. This is the reality. He's spinning it as I'm the tough man getting serious with it. It's not. He's doing this because he doesn't have a choice.
Or global factors.
There
are global factors.
But look, let's be honest about the reaction of all of the major supermarkets who are not only just worried about the budget, but also worried about the employment rights legislation that's coming down the road very shortly. This is not a business-friendly country right now, and the first and this is a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who went for economic growth. They had, you know, and a lot of people focusing on the budget, but let's just go back to that financial statement in July, by the way, where they gave £10 billion of public sector to the public sector in terms of pay rises, but didn't actually secure any greater productivity. Now, I'm all for giving the public sector pay rises, but let's do that when more money is coming into the Treasury, because we've got businesses out there growing.
More. Let's be real. Before the budget, 1,600 CEOs closed down their businesses just before the budget because of the amount of uncertainty, you know, she created in the market. You know, Theo's perfectly right. This is the most anti-business government I've ever seen, because its policies and the choices. This is the most important thing. The economy is about choices, and the Labour Party has chosen to give money without any kind of, you know, return on investment, and it just threw the money around like it was going out of fashion. And now they're reaping the consequences of it. And yet again, it will be the poorest and the most vulnerable that have got to feel it the hardest.
And the other thing to say about this, and I completely agree with Peter, is that these measures are being introduced to keep the bond markets off the Chancellor's back.
Yes.
That's why she's having to come up with these £5 billion of cuts. You can bring down the benefits bill, but there's a far smarter way to do it, Peter, and that's actually by investing in a system, in the Department of Work and Pensions, and in the job centres to actually support people back to work. We saw what happened when David Cameron and George Osborne, during austerity, they cancelled Remploy, which had about 50 factories right across the country, where you had disabled people going to work. Yes, those factories had to be subsidised to the tune of £50 million, but you had thousands of disabled people being employed right across the country, not claiming benefits. They thought, oh, well, we need to save the cash, let's just cut those factories, and all of those disabled people ended up on the dole. What the system needs is, it needs investment to get people who can't work or are unwilling to work back into the workplace, to support employers to take them on. But what they've ended up now is just coming up with measures just to keep foreign investors happy, that this is a stable enough country in which to invest in, so we don't end up in a dire situation.
And it's also the political aspect, is that Keir Starmer needs some positive headlines to kind of counteract the absolute catastrophe that the economy is in.
There is a big difference, isn't there, between the view of him in regard to his foreign policy versus his domestic policy.
He's taking his after ball.
Very. What did you say? Sorry,
he's taking his after ball.
Yeah.
He loves doing the foreign policy. We know he likes having those summits at Lancaster House. He likes going. We know he likes flying around the world, meeting world leaders. But whilst he's been away, he hasn't had a grip on the dire situation the economy's now found itself in.
Okay, what do you think about what Peter and Theo were saying? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to give me a ring or send me a voice note. Lots of people getting in touch on text as well, 87222. Dawn in Chelmsford says, I often wonder how people live on benefits. I suspect that a proportion work in the black economy. Benefits should be a safety blanket for genuine hardship. There's another group called taxpayers who fund everything. Chris in Ottershaw says, good morning, Peter. What I find curious about the benefits issue is that many benefit claimants refuse to take jobs that are offered to them because it's the wrong kind of job. If the pay offer doesn't leave them any worse off, they should be able to take the job until they find something that is more suited to them. Hard has been in touch and says, great show, Peter. The 43% of people who don't speak English is a major worry. They're a drain on the taxpayer. They will be on benefits because you can't get a job if you can't speak English. We will talk about that in a second. We'll also reflect what Keir Starmer has been saying. He is talking about being prepared to defend any deal through a coalition of the willing. We've begun that process, says Keir Starmer. This morning we can take it forward, and then given the developments in the last few days, we need to keep the pressure on Putin to come to the table, the Prime Minister says. I think collectively we've got a number of ways we can do that. So we're going to focus in this meeting. He's talking about, these are words from the meeting that he's talking to all these leaders around the world on strengthening Ukraine, being prepared to defend any deal ourselves through a coalition of the willing, and keeping that pressure on Russia at this crucial time. We'll reflect that. We'll talk more about this part of the country where 43% of people don't speak English as well. We'll also talk about the two-tier justice I've been banging on about for the last couple of weeks as well, and the fact that the Sentencing Council may be rethinking their outrageous plan to have sentences, or at least a recommendation for sentences for people based on whether their ethnicity or whether they're trans or whatever whatever. Also, Sadiq Khan spending almost £500,000 on 6 diversity roles. Shocker there from him, not at all. Stay with us here on Talk. We have a lot more to talk about on the debate desk between now and 11, and then we're going to talk to the Veterans Minister. Let us know your thoughts on what he should be asked by me at that in that interview as well. Stay with us.
Had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, you know, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, if you live in Leicester, you may be aware of a part of Leicester called North Evington. It is home to 1,670 people across about 12 streets. There, 43% of residents over the age of 16 speak little or no English. What do you think about this? 43% of people in this particular area of Leicester not speaking English. We're asking the question today, how important is it for immigrants to speak English? 0344 499 1000. Peter Barnes, what do you think?
I think it's incredibly important, not just on an integration level, but also if you look at it from a security level, because if we go back to 2017, there was a big report done, and it showed that the majority of people who don't speak English are women, and they're coming from Pakistan and Bangladesh, you know, areas of, you know, with let's just say non-traditional wedding practices and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So, you know, there is a huge kind of safety aspect to this as well. But, you know, when we're looking at this data, it's important to remember this is from 2021. You know, with the number of people that have come in here because of the small boats crisis and aspects like that, I expect that number to actually be significantly higher. But, you know, if we go back to the coalition years, you know, they slashed all the programs for people to help them learn English. So on one hand, you kind of have to give them sympathy, but it is so important to speak English, you know, just to get on in society and to actually be part of, you know, British way of life and actually to understand what it is to live here. And I think that is really where we keep butting heads and, you know, where these big tensions, because something that is seen as non-British is always bent backwards over to, and, you know, it always seems to be that, you know, it's always the British way that has to give way. And it is for me, it's such an important aspect that it really strikes me that you don't have to have even the most basic levels to come here. You know, in other nations, you do have to have a basic understanding of the language, and yet we just don't. It's always struck me that.
Mary in County Down has been in touch and says, why is anyone remotely shocked or surprised that there's an area of the country where huge numbers of people don't speak English? Any GP, social worker, council administrator or police officer working in various towns and city suburbs could attest to this. Are you in any way surprised, Theo?
No, I'm not. But I would say that when you learn English and when migrants come to this country and make this country their home, speak English, it can work. I went out to dinner last night, and we went out with a relative of mine, and we went to a steak restaurant. We turned up late, and we sat at the bar. You know, some of those where you sit at the countertop, and we were looking at where the steaks were being cooked, and there wasn't one person cooking the steaks. There were about 10 guys there, and not one of them would have had English as their first language. But do you know what? They all spoke English. That was the language they all spoke to each other. These people come from all over the world, and they all spoke English, and the kitchen just worked absolutely fine. We had a delicious meal, and it was wonderful. But it just goes to show, I think, that actually when you come to this country, you learn English. You may have already learned it. You learn English. That actually it can work.
Of course.
Well, and the danger is
it's so essential, isn't it?
It's so essential, and that's what everybody. I think it works for. It works right across the board, and I think the danger comes when you, and I understand why doctors' surgeries do it. I understand why councils do it. I understand why particular NHS trusts will do it, is that they will put instructions or directions in particular languages. I get it, right? Because they just need the service to function. They need people to be able to access a GP, or they need people to be able to find their way to the correct department in a hospital, or they need people to be able to access the correct service within a local authority. But what it does is it just says it enables people to, in effect, not to learn English.
To get by without learning it, without an incentive.
And if we're all going to live side by side, and we're all going to have to get on with each other and speak to each other, the language seems like the obvious denominator.
Of course, places like Leicester, for example, I mean, they have long had huge immigrant communities. The lack of English
it's seen as the jewel of multiculturalism, isn't it?
Well, it is, and
let's
it shouldn't be.
Real,
but I just want to say that obviously, police forces, courts, health services, councils, other public services. I mean, they're spending increasing amounts of money on interpretation services, and the taxpayer, of course, picking up the bill for that.
Yeah, of course, and that's going to upset a lot of taxpayers. But let's be real, when we look at Leicester, they've got one of these so-called Gazan MPs. There is a political consequence to this kind of ghettoisation because of the lack of integration into British society. Let's not forget, in Leicester, there was also race riots on the streets just a few years ago. You know, whilst we keep talking about the wonders of diversity and the wonders of multiculturalism, there is a consequence to failing to cut the apron strings of whatever nation they have come from, and their failure to integrate and those issues are being brought onto our streets, and which is again costing the taxpayer more money. We have to do better at bringing people in and actually making sure that they do assimilate. You know, one of the big problems of multiculturalism is the rejection of the native culture. That is the entire principle of multiculturalism, that you keep your own culture. But that comes at the detriment of whatever nation you've moved to, and we're now feeling the effects of that. So when people say multiculturalism has failed, in a way they're right, but also in a way they're wrong, because it's worked perfectly, because these people have retained their culture. They've just happened to live in a different country, and it is the UK that is suffering, because let's be real, we've seen reports now that diversity is not the great economic boost that many preached that it was. You know, we're starting to see the consequences of this play out, and it is happening in places like Leicester and Batley and other places like that with huge immigrant populations, and you know, it has a consequence, and we don't talk about that, and anybody who dares bring that up is often shouted down as some kind of racist or xenophobe, and yet, you know, we start to see things like violence on our streets, like we saw in Leeds, for example.
It's interesting as well.
There's real world consequences.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting as well on the interpreter side of things, because it's another big pressure on things like the health service already having big pressures on its budget. And I wonder, you know, there are many people who might just say, well, hold on a second, if I go to Spain and need to go to the health service there, I need to pay for an interpreter myself, or learn the language, or try to do something with my phone to, you know, if you happen to be on holiday or something. I just wonder, I mean, there'll be a lot of people who do all the right things, who pay their taxes, who you know, contribute to the economy, who will say, well, should I be paying for this?
Yeah, look, you make a very good point about that. I was thinking, as I was cycling over to see you this morning, Peter, I was thinking about, you know, would I go to France and live in France without learning French? I would not dream of it. Yeah. Because you just would not get on.
And it would be perfectly.
You would arrive in France and you would not speak French, and your life would be a misery.
And it would be perfectly socially. It would be perfectly socially acceptable within France for people to kind of look at you, give you the side eye, and say, why don't you, you know, this local person...
s'il vous plaît, it's not going to cut it.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
one thing I would starve.
One thing I would say, though, is there's a fundamental difference between moving somewhere and going on holiday. We often hear that argument about, you know, would you go on holiday to somewhere and not speak the language? The point is that these people have settled here, that they want to live here. And, you know, there's a way of integrating into a society to which you have chosen to be here.
But just on that, it was in quite an interesting short documentary I saw with and previously, when British footballers have gone over to play football in Spain or in France, they haven't learnt the language and they haven't settled it. We've not had a great export of British footballers. And I was watching a very interesting short documentary with Billy Gilmore and Scott McTominay, two Scottish footballers who went over to play for Napoli. And they do training in the morning or gym in the morning, and then they go and learn the language. And they're getting in the first team, and they're doing fantastically well. And it's working because they are able to play with their teammates and integrate as part of a team. They're learning the language, and the club is saying you need to learn Italian because that's going to help you get on and be a success and make a success of your life in Italy. And that's just like one example.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. Just the latest line from Starmer. This is in regard to the call that he's on with all these other leaders in regard to Ukraine. He says, if Putin is serious about peace, it's very simple. He has to stop his barbaric acts on Ukraine and agree to a ceasefire. I mean, he's saying much the same things as he said previously. Let me just actually read out a few messages. Jane has said, many people in this country do not agree with the Prime Minister and are not willing. They want this war stopped and do not want British troops on the border with Ukraine. Well, I'll be asking the Veterans Minister, Defence Minister, in a few minutes' time whether he thinks that the forces are ready for this, whether if we send peacekeeping troops that they're ready. Tony in Manchester said, the one question I would like to ask regarding veterans, why is there a single illegal immigrant in a house or hotel room when there's a single veteran on the street? They've been given more to this country than anyone. Tony, I will ask that exact question when I'm going to keep that on the screen. I'm not going to delete it. I will ask that exact question to Al Carns in a few minutes' time. He is the Veterans Minister. Tracy in Wakefield says, why does our Prime Minister show a strength to protect the Ukrainian borders while doing so little to protect ours? A worried viewer in Swansea says, I'm really worried about the benefits reforms. I only receive £185 a week to live on. It's not easy. I have a gas bill of £429 to pay next week and an electricity bill of over £200. If they cut my benefit, I might as well be dead, says that worried viewer in Swansea. That's absolutely heartbreaking to read. And it does show, Peter, doesn't it, the huge emotional energy that people, the worry that many people will have who quite rightly receive benefits. There's some people who are scroungers and shirkers and people who shouldn't receive benefits, but there are many people who are genuinely disabled or can't work who get these benefits, who I as a taxpayer are perfectly happy. That's what we should do in a compassionate society, but they will be very worried over the next couple of weeks.
You know, we saw the same thing over the winter fuel allowance. You know, you know the emotional trauma that this government is imparting on its people because of its economic incompetence is criminal as far as I'm concerned. You know, there is no way that this person should be in that situation. But let's look at the policies pursued by Ed Miliband and Net Zero. His policies are putting up bills when he promised to bring them down. You know, we have to start judging these politicians on their actions, on what they're doing, and whether they're making people's lives better. I think the Labour Party are on track to be the new nasty party if they're not careful.
I did a story in the Times yesterday, and it was along just to your correspondent's message about saying I might as well be dead. You know, from Baroness Tanya Gray-Thompson, our greatest Paralympian, 11 gold medals at the Paralympics, and she was saying precisely that point, that with the assisted dying legislation coming along, that many disabled people will be thinking actually their benefits are being cut. What is the point of continuing? It is a desperate situation. Two very quick points. Firstly, many disabled people rely on equipment that uses a huge amount of electricity. Their energy bills are often going to be higher than anybody else's. Wheelchairs, charging, whatever that
washing for hot water, for example, really basic points.
They use higher than usual electricity. The other thing is, and what I'm, I've seen, obviously we were talking about the front page of the Times just now in terms of the most severely being affected. This is the same as the winter fuel allowance, because you're talking about people on fixed incomes. They can't go out. These are people who are really vulnerable, who don't have the option of just getting a job.
To a bit of breaking news now, and that is that the Russian container ship captain Vladimir Motin has been remanded in custody at Hull Magistrates Court. He appeared charged with gross negligence manslaughter in relation to the collision between two vessels in the North Sea earlier this week. Huge news story, of course. That is the Russian container ship captain Vladimir Motin. He has been remanded in custody at Hull Magistrates Court, where he appeared charged with gross negligence manslaughter in relation to that collision between those two ships in the North Sea. Any more on that, of course, we'll bring it to you between now and 12:30. Two quick things I want to ask. One question to Theo, one to Peter. Theo, on this two-tier justice aspect, interesting in that Shabnam Mahmood has gone against the Independent Sentencing Council. So has Keir Starmer. She says no two-tier justice on my watch. Robert Jenrick puts forward a bill that's blocked by Labour.
Yeah, it's smart opposition politics from Robert Jenrick. That's what you do. Okay, you're saying that you oppose the Sentencing Council. Well, here's an opportunity. Here's a piece of legislation. Put words into action. Vote for my legislation that will give you the power to override the Sentencing Council. What does Labour do? It just shrugs its shoulders and says, no, we're not going to do it.
Do you think the Sentencing Council is going to back down?
I think it's going to have to back down. I don't see a way that it can't back down. But I think that it just goes to highlight that there is this continuous friction that you can only see getting worse between the judiciary and politicians, and there needs to be a recalibration.
Another issue I want to ask Peter Barnes about, Sir City Khan, Knight of the Realm, has employing 6 diversity staff, costing the London taxpayer almost £500,000.
Is anybody surprised?
No.
No, not at all. I mean, let's be real. The Mayor's budget is now 15.5 billion plus 4.9 billion in this capital investment fund. It's just Khan going absolutely insane with power, and he is spending and spending and spending. The size of his bureaucracy is 3 times that of what Boris Johnson had. If you could tell me London has got better as a result of
London's not 3 times better.
It's ridiculous, and it staggers me, because yet again he's playing that. Oh well, I've cut things down. He's not. All he's done is used more money from central government and less money from his own pocket. This is just peak politics. It's peak Khan, and I still do not understand how people continue to vote for that man. I will never get that into my head.
Because the Tories never put up a decent candidate.
That's a big point, but yeah, it is just staggering to me. That you've got all these 6 positions on an average of £72,000. Just how you can justify that when a city is clawing back and a Labour Party that is clawing back money and providing nothing. I mean, this is just bad optics. But again, Khan can get away with it because he's comfortable for the next couple of years in his position.
He was elected for a historic third term with a huge mandate. Peter, thank you. That's Peter Barnes there and Theo Usherwood, political commentators. Both Peter's also a political strategist. We're keeping you up to date in terms of what the Prime Minister is saying on this call. We're also got some breaking news, and that's, as I was saying a few moments ago, that the container ship captain, the Russian container ship captain Vladimir Motin, has been remanded in custody at Hull Magistrates Court. That is, of course, after the collision between 2 vessels, big fire as well, earlier on this week. Lots to come, and indeed lots of people getting in touch about veterans, and in just a few minutes time we're going to speak to the Veterans Minister. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. If you want to have a question, a burning issue that you want me to put to him, I'm going to spend the break writing down and getting organised with all the questions. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to talk about America as well as the show goes on, and what is happening with Trump, Ukraine. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a bit more from the Prime Minister today in regard to that call as well. He's been speaking to NATO leaders, Canada, France, the coalition of the willing. Would you be happy for British boots to be on the ground in Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force? That's something I'm going to be asking the Veterans Minister in just a few minutes here on Talk, so do stay with us for that.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. We've got the Veterans Minister, Alistair Carns, with us now. He's the Minister for Veterans and People at the Ministry of Defence. We've only got him for a little bit of time, so I want to get straight into this. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Peter. Delighted to be here.
You are a veteran yourself. You have a very distinguished military career, and you're someone who has had a very successful career in the military outside of politics. You're a relative newcomer to politics. You wrote the other day, without your armed forces, without your security, you can't have a prosperous economy, you can't have the welfare state, you can't have anything that sits below it, and I agree with every word of that. You also wrote, as the government prepares to reform that very welfare state's disability benefit system, many veterans will be feeling anxious about what this could mean for them. Our veterans have served their country, receiving the benefits and compensation they are owed should not be another battle they have to fight. That sounds to me as if it's not just putting your views forward, but also perhaps a warning to your bosses, John Healey and Keir Starmer, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, the reality is, as we move forward in the current fiscal situation, we've got to look at very carefully and well thought through policies that rewrite a lot of the wrongs that have done in the past, and particularly around the welfare system that is failing people. I personally think it's a broken welfare system, and we have 1 in every 8 young people either not earning or learning. And, you know, Labour, Keir Starmer, absolutely focused at changing that welfare system and providing the support to get those people who really want to work back into work and supporting those that can't.
Let's talk about veterans, because I wonder about the sympathy and support for veterans in our society today, not just from the MOD and other parts of government and the state, but unlike years ago, there are now whole communities where there are little or no connection to the armed forces. Would you say that there are places where people are actually perhaps disconnected from veterans? How do we reconnect them?
Hey, Peter, you're on the money there. There's a social and military, what I would call drift or defence drift, of where if I was to ask a lot of people about their grandfather, grandmother, great-grandfather, great-grandmother, they probably all served. And so they had a connection with the military. That's far less now, and actually it's reducing. So it's on us in government, and indeed the rest of government departments, to ensure that every section of society understands what the defence is all about. Understands the benefits it can bring to the nation, and reconnect society and defence back together, because it's really important as we move forward in this fractious geopolitical environment.
You've been a politician now for just a few months, but you certainly know your onions in regard to the armed services. Is the establishment listening? Because we hear a lot about veterans needing support to access benefits, for example, housing, healthcare. I was a special advisor in the Conservative government, and part of what I did both at the Housing Department and at the Justice Department actually was to try to get veterans, get some help for them, and former veterans to actually get proper housing, because it's so incredibly important. Things like mental health, PTSD when they leave the forces. But is the military establishment actually looking after people, properly easing their transition back into civilian life? And what more can be done?
Yes, there's a couple of bits there. So first of all, from a veterans perspective, we have various operations running now to support bespoke cohorts of veterans. So we have Op Restore, which looks at muscular and skeletal issues. We have over 1,000 veterans go through that. Op Fortitude, which helps with housing. We've had 3,000 referrals, and we've housed 800 veterans. We have Op Courage, which you mentioned there, but PTSD, a growing issue when individuals either in defence or come out of the military. We've got £21 million a year into that, and we've had 35,000 referrals onto the Op Courage mental health programme. I just launched Op Ascend a couple of weeks ago to help people into employment. And really importantly, we've just changed the career transition pathway, which means as you come up to leave the military, there's a whole set of programs in place to make sure you get employment. And really interesting, it's over 80% of veterans, when they come out of the military, go straight into employment because they're hugely valuable to the commercial sector and, of course, companies that can benefit from all of the skills that they bring.
We've had an awful lot of questions from our viewers and listeners, many of whom are connected to, or veterans themselves are connected to veteran communities. And Tony in Manchester says, the question I would like to ask Alistair is, why is there a single illegal immigrant in a house or hotel room while there is a single veteran on the street? They have given more to this country than anyone.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Those individuals have given so much. And they protected the freedoms we will enjoy. But I'll go back to Op Fortitude. You know, there's over 1,733 charities out there supporting the armed forces community in a £1 billion industry. We've already had 3,000 referrals into that. We've housed 800 veterans, and there's a multitude of different organisations there to help. Some of which is government funded, some of which is charitable funded. So a lot of the problems that we find with veterans isn't necessarily the level of support that's out there. It's finding the right support and helping them navigate the system to get the support they need. And that's where the government really needs to step in. And you mentioned earlier whether that sort of resonates all the way up to number 10. We've got some really good plans coming. We can maybe talk about why those plans are needed. But primarily, John Healey and Keir Starmer absolutely tracking it and tracking the importance of veterans in society.
No doubt you and many others will have welcomed the fact that we've just massively increased defence spending, yet we're sending many more billions to Ukraine as well. There's talk of British troops perhaps going to Ukraine, and indeed as perhaps a peacekeeping force. We know that the Prime Minister has been speaking to various leaders across Europe, particularly today. Shouldn't the government ring-fence a sizable proportion of the new money for veterans?
So let's cover off the Ukraine bit first.
Are we ready, do you think? Are we ready if a peacekeeping force had to go in a month or so?
So I would argue the armed forces are absolutely ready. And they would stand up tomorrow to protect the freedoms that we enjoy, similar to every generation prior to us. What I would say is that the leadership demonstrated by Labour, Keir Starmer and John Healey and the Chief of Defence Staff over the last 3 weeks has been absolutely exemplary. Just last week we had a Chief of Defence Staff meeting where we had 34 chiefs from across sort of the Western world come together to talk about what this force may look like. That was 37 nations represented there. And next week the momentum just keeps going, and John Healey will be leading more alongside Keir Starmer. So that's absolutely fantastic. On the veteran space in particular, it's worth just stepping back and having a look. Canada, interestingly, has a large proportion of its veterans support network, almost into the thousands. The UK has 60 people in the Office for Veterans Affairs and probably about 300 to 400 in defence. And that's why we pulled the two together, so we can make them more than the sum of their parts. But we've got to do much more than that. John Healey's absolutely on side, and we need the government and defence to take more of an active role in supporting veterans and helping the charitable sector deliver the support to the right place, right time, to the right people. And we're absolutely committed to do that, but that's yet to come.
How much of a pain in the backside are you internally in the Labour government? How much are you going to Angela Rayner and saying, do you know what, there's an awful lot that needs to be done for housing for veterans? How much are you going to Wes Streeting and saying, healthcare for veterans, we need to sort this out, Wes, come on, sort it out? How much of an advocacy role are you doing behind the scenes?
So, your network is your net worth. I'm on the homelessness committee where Angelina Rayner has run that, and I've championed veterans there. I speak to MCHLG all the time on housing. But actually, we've got to think, rather than small, singular lines of effort, my view is we've got to think of systemic change. So how do we, for example, take the defence housing strategy as we move forward with that and ensure that a proportion of that housing is for veterans? They're the type of things that will deliver systemic change over a longer period of time, rather as well as short-term fixes.
And I mean, we've had Johnny Mercer, of course, who served as well. You were about to be a very senior officer. You're about to be a brigadier. You were a senior officer, but you're about to be a brigadier before you left to come into politics. I just wonder, what is your big idea? If you look back in 5 years' time, if you're still the Veterans Minister, what will you want to have achieved?
So my view, again, step back, 1,733 charities. We've got 2 million veterans in the United Kingdom. We've got the Office of Veterans Affairs, 60 people. But below the Office of Veterans Affairs, we have very little. I mean, there's nothing from a government perspective. So what I would like to see is a proper operational headquarters and then connections into local authorities and the provision of service and in the enforcement, communication, education on the delivery of the covenant, which we're going to bring into law in 2026, to ensure not just veterans get the best deal, but our armed forces as a whole are not disadvantaged because of their service. So when I step away in 5 years, I want to see an institutionally resilient structure that, irrelevant if I go, irrelevant if Labour goes, will sustain, remain in place, and veterans will be looked after over a longer term. Really, and just last point on that, really important as well. If we get called into a bigger conflict, I mean, in Ukraine, there are 2,000 casualties between Ukraine and Russia every day. We must ensure we have a structure in place to support veterans, because if we don't, and we do get called into a bigger conflict, we'll be in an even worse position than we are now.
Sean in Warwickshire has been in touch and he says, can you ask Alistair Carns why so many military personnel were let down by the armed forces because of our sexuality? I did 3.5 years in the army in the 90s and went through hell, including conversion therapy and a military hospital. I joined the army as I wanted to make it a career. What would you say to Sean?
Yeah, so I joined in 1999. The ban was still in place. I just met with a group of LGBT veterans in Brighton on Friday. I was really proud to sort of exercise all the way through the recommendations of the Etherton Review, which looked at rewriting some of those wrongs, including the financial redress scheme. And interestingly, this government provided a 50% increase on the financial redress to those individuals that were incorrectly and completely horrifically dismissed or discharged from the military because of their sexuality. So I'd like to say to him that if he was dismissed or discharged or had any other impact, please get in touch with the system and get on there and get involved in the redress scheme so we can right some of those wrongs. I
just have 2 more questions for you. I know you've got to go in a couple of minutes. Louise has said, can you ask Alistair what he thinks of DEI in the forces? Is there too much of it? We've had this controversy recently in regard to the RAF, for example.
No, I've been really clear on this. Diversity is a strength. It makes us stronger. People that think differently provide alternative solutions to complex problems. Diversity absolutely is a strength. But I want to be really clear. The only reason we want to increase our diversity levels, the only reason we do housing, the only reason we do welfare, the only reason we do a lot of stuff in defence is to make us more effective at closing with and defeating the enemy should we be required to do so. And that's the key purpose of defence. Diversity is just another strength to get us and make us more effective at that.
Final question. You're going to scale Everest and come back in 7 days. I know you're a very tough guy who could probably take me out with a single blow or maybe 2. But I mean, how on earth are you going to scale Everest and come back in 7 days?
So I think it's really important, lead by example. Never ask anyone to do something you wouldn't do yourself.
You've re-enlisted in the Royal Marines Reserve, for example, as a minister.
I have. As an MP, I've seen so many volunteers doing stuff above and beyond a job. One rule, it mustn't impact on my ministerial portfolio, hence the reason the timeline, 7 days, 2 hours fizz every day and sleeping in a hypoxic tent every night, get us ready for altitude. Let's go to the top, come back and make as much money and represent veterans in a positive light.
Listen, I think that's going to be fascinating. Nearer the time, could we perhaps talk to you again about it? Because I think there might be a few people who are viewers and listeners who might even sponsor you.
Well, we'd love to, and any help would be really appreciated. It's going to good causes, all about veterans charities and raising awareness for veterans. And remember, to all the listeners out there, our career in the military is a fantastic opportunity. I love 24 years. So anyone listening that's thinking about join up, get in and have a great time.
Al Carns, thank you very much indeed. Alistair is the Minister for Veterans and People, not your typical Labour MP, I think we can safely say. Moz in Northamptonshire has been in touch with a voice note just reacting to what Alistair was saying there in regard to immigrants and hotels. This is what Moz has to say.
Morning, Pete. Instead of attacking the indigenous British people, why not try and start cutting back on how much we're spending on the illegal immigrants what are coming over to this country and we're wasting even more money on? Maybe we could save some there by getting rid of these damn hotels and putting them into old army bases, because they're good enough for our personnel who are serving, like myself when I was in, so they're good enough for them. We need to stop giving them a false image that they're going to get a 4-star hotel whenever they come over, and just give them what they get, and if they don't like it, they can go home.
Jacqueline's also been in touch in regard to the interview we did a little bit earlier on with Emma Lewell-Buck, the Labour MP for South Shields. This is what Jacqueline has to say.
Here we go, once again, another Labour MP going on about, well, if we stop giving free money to freeloaders, I mean, God forbid they would commit suicide. Well, do you know what? People who actually have their homes and can't afford their bills to commit suicide. And during COVID, people were committing suicide. And Labour didn't seem to worry about championing on further lockdowns, did they, when people were losing their business, their livelihood and their homes? I mean, I'm just fed up with everything in this country, that freeloaders seem to be taken into account before anyone of any decency or hard work about them.
Doesn't what Jacqueline says just show the level of frustration still to this day with the huge harm that was done to this country through COVID lockdowns? The huge harm, the legacy of that. We're talking about mental health, we're talking about disabilities, we're talking about all sorts of different things, we're talking about the economy, the problems with getting people back to work, growth, so much of it. Like, I am not saying for a second that the last 14 years of the Conservatives, some of which I was involved with, was perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They did lots of things that were nothing to do with COVID or lockdowns that were bad for the country. But there's just such a legacy of those lockdowns, and I think we're going to be talking about it for many years to come. And Jacqueline, I hear your anger, and I hope the government does too. Lots to discuss. Let me know what you think of what Alistair Carns said. 0344 499 1000. We'll take your calls next here on Talk.
We had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, you know, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, decent amount of reaction to the interview with Alistair Carns there, the Veterans Minister. Good of him to come on. Ian in East Grinstead has been in touch with a voice note. This is what Ian says.
Hi, Peter, it's Ian from East Grinstead. I'm listening to the guy chatting about the army, and the chap said that diversity he sees as our strength. I mean, without being disparaging, I think the guy's a complete pillock. I think the money, forget diversity, should be spent properly in the army on weapons and actually properly training soldiers.
Very interesting thoughts there from Ian. And Anthony in North Yorkshire says, Peter, that Veterans Minister is wrong. I served over 30 years. I left recently. The three reasons not to join the armed forces now is if you're male or white or straight, and if you're all three, forget it. Leslie says there will be no houses available for veterans when Labour are giving leave to stay to thousands of migrants who will be housed, according to Rayner, with priority. Alan says, I was interested to hear from the Labour MP earlier on discussing the number of charities supporting our brilliant armed forces. With a heavy heart, I reluctantly withdrew from the Royal British Legion mailing list last year when I learned they were employing DEI staff on £64,000 plus packages. If they can afford this nonsense, they obviously don't need my £50 a year. Keep up the great work. Yes, we were talking about that as well, and the poppy, the rainbow poppy they were selling and so on. Gary says diversity is our strength. What a clown. Rob says diversity makes us weaker. With runts of the litter would be got rid of in the wild. I mean, I don't know about that, Rob, to be honest, but certainly, I mean, look, if you have different people with different perspectives, that's a good thing. But also, if you have an RAF fighter pilot, I want them to be the best qualified person for it. Michelle says, I would not be happy sending our men and women to fight. We need them here to defend us from within. You'd have thought as a species we would have evolved past the point of wars. You know, someone is making money out of it. As for the migrant hotels, turfing them out, putting veterans in might save some money rather than trying to trick sick people into work. Also, where are all these jobs going to come from for them? Well, on disability allowances, Herbie in Harrow has been in touch and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. You can do the same thing. Herbie, what would you like to say about the disability benefits?
Well, good morning, Peter. The thing is, the government's going about this again the wrong way. It's always taking it away from the people that need it most. I know not everybody perhaps really deserves it. We know there are people that will get away with it because they can and they have done, and that's understandable. But there are genuine people there. But what annoys me so much is that we're not looking after the people we need to look after. We're quite prepared to make illegal immigrants quite welcome, give them everything they want at our expense. They've never paid in a penny, yet these people that are claiming benefits more than likely have worked, have become disabled or whatever, they can't work now, and it's not their problem, but they've paid into the system what everything gives them to the illegal immigrants, which I think is scandalous and disgusting, and it's costing this country a fortune every day.
It is costing an absolute fortune, Herbie, and we're looking at the disability benefits bill. I mean, I don't want it to be £70 billion a year. I want as many people back into work as possible. How do we solve this problem?
Well, the thing is that have we got enough people to investigate? Are these people genuine? If they are, then okay, they'll have to carry on. They'll have to carry on getting their benefits. But there are people that do perhaps could go back to work or do something, because we can't keep on paying this amount of money out and expecting us to have a decent life. It's got to come from somewhere. It's coming from yours and my pocket for these people that sometimes are getting away with it, and those who really do need it should be getting it. The system's so unbalanced, Peter. It's very, very difficult. How are we going to resolve it without creating some sort of problem or crisis within what it's being paid out for?
Herbie, thanks for your thoughts on that. I appreciate that. Emma Lewell-Buck was the Labour MP who was on about an hour ago. Hopefully you caught what she had to say, the MP for South Shields. I asked her about winter fuel allowances and she abstained on the issue. Lee has been in touch on this with a voice note. This is what Lee has to say.
Good morning. Just listening to you talk to Emma, the Labour MP there. Surely you've got to be picking the lesser of two evils when stopping the winter fuel allowance. She's chosen to get rid of it completely just so some of the wealthier people who necessarily don't need it don't receive it, thus taking away from people who do need it. You know, there's a lot of people receiving disability allowances that don't need it. Should we just completely stop it? No. You know, it's down to the government. That's just lazy government, in my opinion. It's down to the government to monitor these things better. So, yeah, choosing to take away the full winter allowance, it makes no common sense to me. Good show.
Lee, very interesting thoughts there. And actually, on this point of the winter fuel allowance and lots of other benefits, the means testing, saying, you know, what's your income? Do you deserve it? Are you on a low income? Should you get the winter fuel allowance? First of all, that means testing does cost a lot of money. There's a lot of process around that, should that happen. But then you might just say, well, actually, if you receive a certain benefit for being, you know, if you get the pensions top up, for example, should you get the winter fuel allowance as well? Maybe say to all those people, they should get it. There's got to be a better way. In fairness to Emma Lewell-Buck, she said she abstained on it because she thought part of the bill worked and she was happy enough to take it away from people who don't need it. I mean, we all know pensioners who need it, and we all know pensioners who don't need it. There's some who have very, very good pensions who £400 a year or whatever it is to them as a couple perhaps isn't that much money, whereas to many people £400 would be a huge amount of money and would keep them warm through the winter. So there's a lot going on here, and I sort of agree with some of your points there, Lee, but I just wanted to make those other points clear. Let's hear from Claire with a voice note.
Morning, Peter. Claire here. As soon as the state gets into trouble, it turns its attention to the citizens of this country, either to the tax-paying citizens or the unemployed or pensioners if things get tight. I'm all for people losing benefits if they're doing so unduly and playing the system. But when we're paying inducements for illegal migrants to come into this country and giving them freebies like driving lessons and allocations to amusements, then surely this smacks of more two-tier initiatives in our two-tier country.
Thank you, Claire. Jay has also some thoughts on this.
Where are the jobs coming from for all the disabled people? We've just risen the national insurance, where employees are now going to cut jobs. Now you want sick people to go and find these jobs that all these other people are now searching for. It's just going to be a massive jobs line with no jobs available. The country's broke.
Jay, really, really good points there. And I mean, you made them in 19 seconds and you made a really strong and very clear argument there. And I think that is a very, very good set of thoughts there. Jay, just one quick thing. I heard myself on the background. Do press mute just for a few seconds while you record your voice note, but always nice to be listened to. We're talking as well about Ukraine. Richard's been in touch and says Russia will never accept a UK-EU peacekeeping troops being stationed in Ukraine as part of a lasting peace agreement, and if they were imposed, Putin would regard them as legitimate military targets. Well, he has said that. Let's get a perspective on the Ukraine, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the programme as well, from an American perspective with Steve Gill. Peter is in Croydon. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, Peter.
Good morning. Hi.
I've just seen a 2-minute video on Starmer in front of the computer, saying like what you were saying earlier. He's saying the same old things. Now, what he's saying about Putin, you know, he's just poking the bear, and he's saying, he's talking as though the peace deal is over. It's not. I mean, you got Trump talking positive, Marco Rubio talking positive, but you get him. And it used to be Starmer. He used to team up with Macron. Macron don't do it anymore. He's the only one who's poking the bear, and he's winding up Donald Trump. Plus, he's like say poking the bear.
But surely it is Vladimir Putin. Surely the ball is in Vladimir Putin's court at the moment, and he has to make a decision. Are we going to go ahead with this ceasefire, or are we not?
Yeah, I know, but just leave it to Donald Trump. Because Putin has said we don't want boots on the ground, and Starmer keeps on going back. Just leave him alone.
Okay.
You know, leave it to Trump.
We'll see if that happens and is realistic. Peter, thanks for your thoughts. Sean in Cardiff says, why would anybody want to join our forces now? When our soldiers suffered from Gulf War syndrome, the Ministry of Defence and government tried to deny it and throw our men and women under the bus, says Sean in Cardiff. You're absolutely right. Barry says, as a veteran, I approached the Veterans Service to ask them if they would fund a degree I wished to take, but it was refused because I'd been out of the service longer than 10 years. People in prison are offered free degrees. Where is the fairness in this? Todd Davison in Cambridge says, I watched a video earlier on permanent road closures in Bristol. They are taking place overnight when most people are unaware and are said to be part of the 15-Minute Cities initiative, which prohibit personal independent travel. Any thoughts on that, Todd? Worth looking into. Certainly, thank you for that. That does sound pretty sinister. Andrea says a lot of people on personal independence payments are on it due to poor lifestyle choices, not genuine mental health problems. I see this as a nurse. It needs reform. Well, we're going to talk to Dr. Amu Raju, OBE, who is a disability ambassador with Disability Direct. We'll get his perspective on all of this and yours as well after the break here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who has got in touch, including Rob, who says compassionate societies just get taken advantage of. It is not a right to get benefits, so when you do get them, be thankful, because it is going to be my loss. Really, really interesting thoughts on all of this. There are many, many people getting in touch on immigration, on disabilities, and in fact, the front page of the Times today saying that 1 million people to have disability benefits cut by Labour. We're getting a lot of speculation about this, not a lot of firm facts, because we don't know until the spring statement in a couple of weeks' time what Rachel Reeves is actually going to do. But Dr. Amu Rajan, OBE, is a disability ambassador with Disability Direct and has joined me now. Amu, thank you for joining me today. There must be a lot of disabled people who are very, very worried about what's going on at the moment and the speculation that is around. It reminds me of the lack of business confidence before the budget. It reminds me of elderly people in regard to the winter fuel allowance, thinking that was going to be cut, and then it was. Just give me a sense of the people who are disabled, who you talk to every single day, who are thinking about this and worrying about this.
The levels, morning Peter, the levels of the levels of anxiety within the population in general when it comes to disability and disabled people and benefits, it's astronomical. It's through the roof. Wherever I go, it's the main topic of discussion. People are genuinely concerned that their income is going to be affected. Let's get something in perspective. Before this benefits conversation started, disabled people are already over £1,000 per month worse off. Just to make ends meet, they're in deficit in their budget, in their homes, in their general running costs, just to live on an equal footing. They're over £1,000 per month worse off.
The vast majority, Amu, the vast majority of taxpayers, like me, have absolutely no problem with people who are genuinely disabled getting benefits. If you can't work, I am happy for my taxes to go to you. We are a compassionate society. That's what should happen. We also see that the benefits bill is £70 billion. The Office of Budgetary Responsibility says it could go up to £100 billion a year. That is not sustainable. How do we get it down?
Well, it's a genuine question. The issue here is, let's get something straight. Disabled people want to work. They do want to work. What's broken, if people think the benefit system is broken, equally, the support of getting disabled people into work, that is broken too. There's not been enough investment recently, particularly in trying to get disabled people off benefits.
Tell us a little bit about, there's a really good example that was made earlier on about an organisation called Remploy, and then a lot of funding was cut for that. Just talk us through what that was. It seems to be quite a good idea. £50 million a year of public money. That seems to have paid off to a huge degree. Why was it cut?
Well, it may have been good and bad. It was good at the time when it was set up, but it wasn't about integrated employment. It was almost segregated employment for disabled people. What we want is a society where disabled people work alongside non-disabled colleagues on an equal basis. Now, let me give you my personal example. 30 years ago, I'm a disabled person. 30 years ago, I was unemployed and on sickness benefits. And there was a scheme. There was a disability employment advisor at the job centre who talked me through and got me through, navigated me through the system, and I ended up doing a work placement. And within the same organisation, within years, I became the CEO. So with the support and the structures in place, disabled people can achieve and will work. What we've got now is a system where disabled people just said, well, apply for jobs and hope for the best. And once you've got it, then we'll see if we can try and support you through the Access to Work scheme, which, by the way, is still not well understood by employers, and it's one of the schemes that's just not advertised by the DWP at all in terms of getting disabled people into work and supporting them through the interview process and sustaining them.
Amo, work has changed a huge amount over the past few years, particularly in regard to the COVID lockdowns, particularly in regard to it being so many people work from home, so many people, I know not all disabled people can use a computer, for example, but many of them can. One interesting aspect that Ian Duncan Smith mentioned when I interviewed him a few days ago was that 0 hours contracts could help people with conditions where, I mean, my best friend has MS, for example. Some days she can work a lot, some days she can't work at all, some days she could do a couple of hours. Would 0 hours contract or something like that actually be an idea in terms of disabled people saying, work as much as you can, being much more flexible in regard to work? Because there are a lot of jobs that, yes, every job has a deadline in it somewhere, but there are a lot of jobs that could conceivably be done as much as the person is able to do.
Yeah, I mean, 0 hours doesn't work when because sometimes if you just go over the threshold, then it cuts off your entitlement to the background support that you get through the DWP.
Well, surely there should be some allowance for that and some kind of flexibility within that.
Yeah. And there used to be a system, I don't know if it still exists, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, it used to be called therapeutic earnings, where you could work and build yourself up and stay on a benefit system and hop in and out until you've got to a level where you've got enough income coming in, you've got the confidence, and then you can step into employment quite comfortably. And we need to go back into history. Schemes have been tried and tested which work, but for some reason, successive governments have just chopped them and come up with new things. We used to have New Deal for disabled people. That worked. As an employer, I employed many disabled people, got them off sickness benefits, and the charity Disability Direct, which I was the CEO for, still has a couple of people there who came through that program. And so it does work. We've got systems in place, but for some reason, successive governments just try bringing in new green papers with new ideas which don't really work for disabled people and getting people off sickness benefits. I understand.
With all that in mind, Amo, what is your message to Rachel Reeves in the next couple of weeks? What do you think would be fair? What changes would be reasonable?
The message to Rachel Reeves is, don't target disabled people. Don't target people who are sick and genuinely cannot work. You're putting everybody into the same pot with there are some people, there may be some people, a small minority. There was some research done last year which proved that the level of fraud within PIP is down to 0%. That it just doesn't exist. That's a misconception. It's a hype that's been put out there. And so let's start being realistic about this. If you want to get people off sickness benefits, you need to invest in systems that will walk them through the minefield and those benefits traps that exist out there. Because some people may be apprehensive about leaving the benefit system because they're going to think, I'm going to lose other entitlements. So it needs a lot more thought, and you need to involve disabled people in that conversation. Involve disability charities, user-led charities in those conversations, not just government ministers who do not have the lived experience of disability.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Amo Amo Raju, Dr. Amo Raju, OBE, who's a disability ambassador with Disability Direct. There's a lot of really interesting views on this. I've heard from quite a few disabled people. I've heard from quite a few people who really have strong views on this, who are receiving benefits, or alternatively people who are, paying taxes and thinking, where is our money actually going? Lots of other questions coming in as well in regard to veterans. We're talking about that as well today. Talking about immigration as well. Leslie says, those in Leicester who don't speak English are obviously claiming benefits. I thought they had to be available for work to claim benefits. Neil says, stop assuming these people want to integrate. They want to turn this country into the hellhole they left. And in regard to Leicester residents, Jo Moore is from Leicestershire, and she says, as Leicestershire residents, we've seen vast areas in the city centre and surrounding areas. The immigrants move in, the nationals move out. As the immigrants got wealthier, they also move further out. All the suburbs around the city centre are now filling up with better off previous immigrants. Leicester has changed beyond recognition and not for the better. Tracy in Wakefield says, Peter, mass immigration is a powder keg. When walking around our own town centre, it is not like being in Britain due to the lack of people speaking English, and it makes people angry. Well, thank you for those thoughts. We'll take more of your thoughts, calls, texts and tweets. Use the break, pick up the phone, 0344 499 1000.
Had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, you know, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks for all your messages. This person says, why do socialists believe wealthier people in society have to pay for everything? Not everyone who pays 40% tax is little Lord Fauntleroy. We were all told at school that if we studied hard, passed our exams, that we'd have a better career in front of us. Now we're being fleeced by the politicians from the left in an open display of the politics of envy. Haven't people who made the most of themselves not already paid far more tax, either in income tax or VAT, council tax, etc.? If they get a bit back to help with some bills, then do what? Grant says, what are the views of the Veterans Minister on Britain failing to secure its borders? Well, we did ask a bit about immigration there, but didn't get every question in, unfortunately. Good morning, Peter, says Rachel, not wanting to understate the seriousness of things in Ukraine, but Starmer should focus on events at home instead of prancing around like a proud peacock on the world stage. Well, you're not the first person to make that point, Rachel, about Keir Starmer being abroad quite a lot. Never hear Keir, some people call him. Who does Starmer think he is? We can't take him seriously. Never mind Russia, says this texter. Another texter, Jackie, says Starmer is posturing on the global stage while his own country is broken. Trump holds the negotiating cards and all European leaders are doing is trying to make themselves look relevant. Another one on this. Paul says Starmer strutting around the international stage trying to look and sound relevant is laughable. My abiding memory of Starmer is when he wore a plastic face visor during COVID. He looked like a prat then and nothing has changed. The worst Prime Minister in our history, says Paul. Lots of thoughts on immigration, lots of thoughts as well on disability. Let's go to Moz in Northamptonshire. I understand you're a veteran yourself, Moz, and you've some thoughts on what the Armed Forces Minister was saying a little bit earlier on.
Yeah, you're right, Cardi B. We've spoken before. I'm gay in a same-sex relationship. And I can tell you, as a gay person, it's pretty much fine to be in the army until something happens.
Okay.
So
in what way?
Well, I was assaulted in the army.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry to hear that.
Swept under the yeah, I know. It's one of those things. It's been 10 years. I've tried pushing my life forward. But I still got some anger towards the army because they betrayed me. They let me down. They weren't there for me when I needed them.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I got out of the army, no one wanted anything to do with me because my face did not fit their picture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I can tell you, diversity isn't our strength along the lines of certain areas of the LGBT wider community I don't believe in anymore because it's kind of rubbish. But you can't have certain individuals on the front line because they're medically downgraded permanently.
So tell us, Moz, just go back a little bit. There's a lot in that, and I want to go through a few bits. But let me just ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Moz, so how long did you serve for?
On and off over a decade.
And things were going okay, and you felt valued by your colleagues. They got on okay with you. It wasn't an issue.
Yeah, you have the usual banter in the army. Banter is pretty crude.
Yes.
And that's what makes it fun. You know what I mean? Because they were trying to whitewash it and trying to get rid of it all.
Yeah.
Through the DEI rubbish.
Mm.
And you know what? All you got to do is treat people like human beings.
Yeah.
Just be normal.
So tell us what actually happened. Was it someone in the army who assaulted you?
There was some people, yes.
Okay, so they more than one person physically assaulted you.
And I'm not the only person who's had this swept under the carpet.
Yeah.
If you go on to some of the veteran YouTube channels or veteran Facebook profiles, there's a lot of information coming up about this.
So you don't. So when you hear about it,
abused,
yeah. So when you hear about it now,
swept under the carpet.
When you hear about it now, Moz, do you think things have changed at all? Do you think things have got better or not?
No, worse. I know it's got worse. I've still got some contacts in the army, and it's got 100 times worse. Because they want to put this image out that they're brilliant, they're fantastic, they're acceptant. They even used my story in a campaign 10 years ago on a poster.
Right.
But they wouldn't admit it happened. The RMP screwed me over so many times because they went looking for stories about people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they made their own little fictitious argument that I was lying.
Do you think
you lie about getting abused?
Do you think the army and the armed forces can ever be truly welcoming to people who are gay or from minority backgrounds, or just people who are just a bit different for whatever reason to the idea of what someone should be?
Yeah, they can be, but they need to stop all this DEI rubbish. Diversity is not our strength.
Yeah.
We see it in society because we've got lobbyists saying, well, you can't say that, you can't say this. Well, just get over yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Okay.
Get a grip.
Okay, Moz, thanks. No, that's absolutely fine. Moz, thank you. I'd be angry if I were you as well. Moz, thanks very much. Give me another ring sometime. Moz in Northamptonshire there. Obviously, we can't put those allegations to the army because, I mean, in fairness to Moz, he spoke in a pretty general sense. He didn't make any specific allegations against anybody, but we'll take it on as read what Moz said, although we don't have a response from the army, and it's hard to ask for one when we don't have specific allegations, which I wouldn't want Moz to make actually for legal reasons, given what he was talking about. But I think it illustrates a point there, and that is the experience of one person who was gay in the military, and diversity was talked about by the Veterans Minister, who himself had a very long and distinguished military career. We're talking about benefits a lot today, and I know that Danny in Shropshire wants to talk about this. He's given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Danny, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm just a bit angry at Miss Reeves going after PIP. I've got cancer. I was diagnosed with it about 18 months ago.
I'm sorry to hear that, Danny.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. The alternative was being dead, so I don't mind the treatment so much. But I was diagnosed about 18 months ago. I had chemo, I had radio. I've had to go on PIP. I didn't want to. I've never claimed benefits in my life.
Yeah.
But I had to take benefits. I'm waiting. I'm going to have a couple of operations on my throat.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go back to work. And what bothers me is that people like me, we're the low-hanging fruit. I have no real experience of the benefit system. I don't know how to navigate it properly.
Mm-hmm. So do you think you're going to lose your PIP in these changes?
I don't know if I'm going to or not, but I'm worried about it. I've tried carrying on. I'm a builder by trade, and I thought, well, while I'm off, I'll do our kitchen up.
Yeah.
It took me 6 weeks to do what should have taken me a week.
Okay.
These speculative announcements like they made about the economy, all they do is scare people to hell.
Mm.
If they're going to do something, they shouldn't fly a kite. They should say, we're going to cut these benefits.
But then people might say, Danny, we've had no warning whatsoever.
Well, say we're going to do it in 6 months or we're going to do it in 12 months. Don't float up the possibility. Because at the moment, the press and the media and the internet are full of, oh, well, PIP's going to go. We're going to freeze this benefit. We're going to stop this benefit. We're going to change the rules. Say what they're going to do or not.
Yeah.
At one time, this sort of thing would have led to a Chancellor of the Exchequer resigning. I believe it happened in about 1963.
That's right. There was a budget that was leaked, but now what they do is they put so much of it in the public domain. They always get their slap down from the Speaker, from Lindsay Hoyle, or whoever it is, John Burke or whoever it is, and they always go, yes, we're terribly sorry, and then nothing happens.
Yeah, I think the time has come for the Speaker to say that person should be removed from the chamber for a week, Sergeant at Arms, and march them out.
Right.
And even if it be the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Danny, thanks for your thoughts on that. I wish you well, Danny, and please keep in touch. Rob has been in touch on WhatsApp and says, it's my belief that benefit scammers and scroungers, who are largely responsible for putting benefits for those who genuinely need them, in jeopardy. The government should be targeting them instead of vulnerable people like my brother. Rob mentioned his brother a little bit earlier on. We did read that out earlier. Jane says, surely by not speaking English, that is a barrier to finding work. Are these people contributing to the high benefits bill? I think they probably are, Jane. Penny in Essex says, all migrants coming here should be able to speak English. If they don't, how can they be made to understand rules and regulations without an interpreter, which we have to pay for, says Penny. Rob says most immigrants don't even speak English that you can understand, and certainly don't understand what being English means, and that's why we have all these no-go areas in the UK where they recreate their old countries and ours. Well, look, there are loads of immigrants who make a really big contribution to our economy, but I totally understand it when people don't speak English and when there are high concentrations of people who don't speak English. That is not going to be a place where people feel where people who are born in this country feel safe. And I know, I mean, I go on holiday to France most years, and I know that, I mean, my French is terrible, and I know I don't feel particularly comfortable when I hear loads of French people, if I'm in a bar or a restaurant or something, and you hear loads of French people talking, you go, well, what are they talking about? I don't know what that is. I'm not sure what that is. What are they saying? Are they happy? Are they sad? Have I done something wrong? Have I not? That's something which, I mean, I love France, it's a great country, but also you don't feel entirely comfortable when you don't understand that, and I can totally get that when you're here in this country as well. Another person says our relatives in Australia and New Zealand laugh their heads off at little old England, which is worse than a third world country. We're a massive joke. Go to the UK, they say, and you can get whatever you want for free. How embarrassing we are. Let's hear a voice note from Kelvin on migrants and disabled people. This is what Kelvin has to say.
Good morning, Peter. You've got migrants now taking far more money out of the system, and the people on benefits are just, disability benefits are just had all theirs cut. And I think that is totally wrong. You've now got migrants, young fit fighting men, fitter than any of the disabled people, taking about $3,000 a month when you total up all the costs that they have, the hotels, the legal aid, and all the freebies they get. And now you've got people on a lot less, struggling to get by because of a disability they've got, probably suffering and pain and everything else. This government doesn't give a crap about anybody apart from fit young men, honestly. couldn't make this up, could you, in this country? Anyway, that's my rant. Bye.
Well, thank you for it, Kelvin. Let's hear from Tony in regard to the interview with Alistair Carns, who was speaking to me earlier on, the Veterans and People Minister. Tony has this thought on diversity in the military.
Hi, Peter. This is Tony from North Wales. Just a quick thought on the interview you just had with Alistair Carns, who said that diversity is a strength in our military. What puzzles me is we have the most successful military in world history ever, but we didn't achieve that through the strength of diversity. So I'm a little confused. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you for that. Quite a number of thoughts on all of this, really, and in America as well. Graham and Bushy has said, in America, many businesses give discounts and additional benefits to veterans. Should the government promote that here? Yes, they should. There's a little bit of that in this country, Graham, but not nearly enough. And Leslie says, as ex-head of the DPP, how can Starmer put his name to a discriminatory sentencing bill, says Leslie. Well, it's actually guidance rather than legislation. It's a subtle difference, but it's an important one that the Sentencing Council are putting forward. They're having a rethink on that. Thank goodness. We're going to talk more about what has been going on this morning. Keir Starmer has been speaking to various leaders from around the world. We'll reflect on that in regard to Ukraine, and that Elon Musk appears to endorse Rupert Lowe amid the reform civil war. That, of course, has been going on for about 10 days or so, nearly 2 weeks now. We'll get a little bit on that from Steve Gill, who's a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, and your thoughts too after the break here on Talk. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, and this morning Keir Starmer has been speaking to all sorts of people from around the world, from Canada, from France, NATO people and all the rest of it, in regard to Ukraine and what is happening there. And at 12:30 he's going to do a press conference in Downing Street and keep up to date with all the news bulletins, because we'll bring you, of course, what he has said there. We know his views on Ukraine, they're not a mystery necessarily, but this coalition of the willing has been talking. We're going to talk to Steve Gill about that in a second. He's the former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. Elon Musk appears to endorse Rupert Lowe, the Reform UK MP, amid the Reform Civil War. Could be an interesting one to talk to Steve about. Lots of people getting in touch as well, and in this half hour we're going to take your calls, texts and tweets as time goes on, so be sure to give me a ring. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or a voice note, or give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss in the next half an hour here on Talk. Well, veterans was a huge issue we were talking about with the Veterans Minister, and we've had lots and lots of reaction to this, lots of people wanting to get their questions in. I'm sorry, I only had 15 minutes with him, I couldn't get everything in, but Steve has been in touch with a slightly longer message, which I am actually going to read out. I'm a veteran of 23 years, and I'd like to first of all give credit to your guest for coming on Talk. You don't get many Labour politicians to the pound on your station. You're absolutely right. We had two today. We had Emma Lewell-Buck MP, and we had the Veterans Minister, Alistair Carns. And indeed, tomorrow at 10:30, we're going to have the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. So if anybody has any thoughts on what I should ask Wes Streeting, you let me know. Just to go back to what Steve is saying here. Secondly, I would like to hear your guest views on the repealing of the act by government that will undoubtedly expose veterans to more politically driven court cases. Nobody is saying veterans are above the law, and where there is a compelling new evidence, by all means, reinvestigate and convict if necessary, but the latest convictions didn't have compelling new evidence at all. It looks bad, it smells off, and we shouldn't do it. There are plenty of people with blood on their hands out now free as a dividend from the Belfast Agreement, but veterans appear to still be pursued. I absolutely respected the background of your guest, less so now as a Labour MP, but there you go. Please keep an eye on veteran prosecutions and intervene where you're able. We don't want exemption or special treatment, just fairness. Steve, this whole issue of legacy is something I actually know quite a lot about. I worked at the Northern Ireland office for about a year and a half, and apart from Brexit, I would say it's probably the biggest issue that we dealt with. How to bring truth, justice and some form of closure to people in regard to the Northern Ireland troubles. It's a very, very difficult one. There was a legacy bill that the Conservatives brought in. I didn't think that was fit for purpose. Labour are now repealing that. Should there be an amnesty? Well, no, I don't think so. But it's very, very difficult to get convictions. And is the evidence there, especially forensic evidence, so many years on, or should we just draw a line under it and try to move on? It's a very, very difficult issue, and we will, of course, continue to cover it here on Talk, not just from the veterans' perspective, but also from the victims' perspective. But you're absolutely right. There are terrorists who have had their sentences cut to a huge degree and are out on the streets and having a free life when many believe they shouldn't. And that is a real slap in the face to so many victims in Northern Ireland and indeed in the rest of the UK, because there are so many different atrocities that terrorists took part in, not just in Northern Ireland, Loyalist and Republican, but also in mainland Britain, things like the Brighton bomb, the Birmingham pub bombings and so on. And we've covered that on the programme on a number of occasions. Laurie Laird is with us now. She's a journalist and a US political expert. Laurie, really, really interesting in regard to Ukraine. We know that the Prime Minister is going to give a press conference in about half an hour's time. But it's Donald Trump, really, Laurie, who is the person who has the biggest hand to play here. He keeps talking about Vladimir Zelensky having no cards. I wonder, from an American perspective, what you think about where things are in regard to a Ukraine ceasefire.
Well, it seems right now, hi, Peter.
Hi there.
The cards are all with Vladimir Putin right now, aren't they? I mean, through Trump's sort of madness, he has created a situation where Putin has to make a pretty big decision here. I don't think anyone believes that Putin is ready to stop fighting. I mean, there are, well-documented problems he's having, problems with recruitment, problems with getting goods in or components in to continue to feed that war machine. But it doesn't seem that Putin has accomplished his goals, which was, essentially to put Ukraine into his sphere of influence. So he's got some big decisions to make. It's not entirely clear which way he's going to jump.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I wonder, from an American perspective, I know you're based in the UK now, but from obviously keeping up with American friends and media and so on, I mean, is Keir Starmer really part of this? Is this coalition of the willing really a thing that people care about?
I think that there's a lot of fatigue with the war in the U.S., and it's the sort of thing that most Americans are not following the way we are. And I always have to check myself because I'm so geeky about current affairs. And I have to check myself because most Americans are not following every twist and turn here. And, you spent some time in the States, and as you know, Americans aren't internationalists so much. They're not as concerned about what's going on in the world. And as Donald Trump once said, there's a big ocean between Europe and the U.S. What goes on in Europe is not of that much interest to the U.S. But on the other hand, Americans have a real affinity, almost a fascination with British politicians. Tony Blair was incredibly popular in the U.S., and I think Keir Starmer, he acquitted himself pretty well in the Oval Office. I mean, it was a stroke of genius to bring an invitation from Prince Charles. And I think any Americans who are following international affairs to any extent probably have a bit of fondness for Keir Starmer. He's probably more popular in the U.S. than he is in the UK.
Yeah, it's very interesting because he, of course, as you will see as an international person living in the UK, he's someone who seems to spend an awful lot of time on foreign affairs, perhaps to the detriment of domestic affairs. With your economist hat on, Laurie, should he be spending more time on that?
Oh, he's doing a lot better with international stuff, isn't he? He certainly doesn't seem to be able to get the right tone with domestic stuff. He had a real poor start economically, and that comes down to his campaign, ruling out so many economic strategies in order to get elected. What we're seeing has really become a mistake. Businesses up in arms about some of the restrictions that are going to come into force. And the new taxes that will come into force next month. I think that he's looking a lot, oddly, and I'm surprised about this, he looks a lot steadier when he's doing international things than he is with domestic things. But I think with the upcoming spring statement, with some new forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility, I think he's going to be tugged back into the domestic arena.
Yes.
And whether he can, we're talking seriously now about spending cuts, which isn't something that they talked about a great deal on the campaign trail. So whether he can hold on to that sort of steadiness that he seems to have gained going forward, I think is an open question. I mean, he doesn't look comfortable when he's talking about economics.
Yes, it is an interesting fact, and he seems, a lot of people think anyway, and I think I'm one of them actually, that he seems to have subcontracted economic policy to Rachel Reeves. That's always a tricky thing for a Prime Minister to do. It worked sort of for Tony Blair because he and Gordon Brown, despite their personal differences, were very, very close politically. But is it working now?
It's working in that I think Rachel Reeves is a bit of a lightning rod for Keir Starmer by distancing himself. He's also distancing himself from some pretty unpopular decisions, and I think these welfare cuts. I think the UK needs to take a very good look at welfare. It needs to take a very good look at why so many people are on long-term unemployment, and the allocation of benefits really needs to be rehashed. But that will be unpopular, and I think as long as he can say Rachel Reeves is in charge, it will probably help him a little bit. Reeves is not a particularly strong media performer, and whether that's it's difficult. It's hard to say that that's important, but it is. And she, constantly says we're going for growth. We're going for growth. That's sort of meaningless. I'm not sure that anyone truly understands what that means. It sounds good, but what does that, what does that mean in terms of policy? What does that mean in terms of how people will feel? It's just kind of a slogan.
Yeah. Laurie, thank you. That's Laurie Laird there, a US political expert and economist as well. Steve Gill is with us, former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administration. Steve, thank you for joining us. I wonder, given everything that's going on in the UK this morning, Keir Starmer speaking to the coalition of the willing, does it make much of a difference really in terms of what the White House is doing with Ukraine, and are we any closer to a ceasefire, do you think, given everything Putin has said this week?
I think Laurie's exactly right that we tend to be isolationist in the U.S. until we get dragged into something. And I think initially there was a lot of enthusiasm for Ukraine, the sense that they were being victimized. And again, we've had decades of Russia, they're the enemy, the Cold War still being, sort of the default setting in a lot of U.S. minds. And I think that over time that's been lost as the bill keeps coming due, as the taxes keep getting paid to send it there, and no resolution, no sense that that the money is being used effectively. More and more reports of billions of dollars missing. That I think sort of the interest here has sort of waned, and you've seen those that were unwilling to speak out and ask for accountability now having a louder voice. And I think America is ready for this to be at an end. And as she pointed out, as President Trump points out, there's this big ocean between us and there. So what's our interest in this?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, in regard to all of that. I wonder, from Trump's perspective, how much patience do you think he has, and indeed should have, in regard to Putin?
Yeah, I think that there's a desire to find a way back. Again, one of the downsides of this whole situation has been it has forced Russia closer to China, who's our, I think, more aggressive adversary. And while pushing Russia closer to China has had a real negative influence, I think Trump's trying to pull Russia back into the sphere of influence of both Europe and the United States. And I think that's his goal. I think he feels that he has at least some personal affinity with Putin, based upon their past conversations, and I think he's hoping to be able to build from that. Now, again, I always underline, it's like we always had Ronald Reagan warn: trust but verify. Just because you're negotiating with, you're trying to build relationships with Russia and with Putin, trust but verify. Don't just take them at whatever they say.
Steve, thanks for your thoughts. That's Steve Gill there, who is a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. We're going to take your calls, texts and tweets in a second. And just remind ourselves about that interview with Emma Lewell-Buck and Alistair Carns as well. Two Labour figures, one minister, one backbencher, today on the programme. Not always you get a lot of Labour MPs, and good for them for coming out and taking questions which were not easy. And Wes Streeting, actually, the Health Secretary, going to be on this programme tomorrow at 10:30. Join me for that. Lots to discuss. Stay with us here on Talk for the next 15 minutes.
We had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we've had two Labour MPs, one minister, one backbencher on the programme today, just to remind ourselves on the specific issue of winter fuel allowance, which is something that a lot of people are talking about disability benefits and winter fuel allowances as well. Emma Lewell-Buck, who's the MP for South Shields, she was on a little bit earlier. Let's just remind ourselves what she had to say. Am I right in saying you abstained on the winter fuel allowance?
Yes, I
Why didn't you just
abstained.
vote against it?
Well, because you'll know yourself, Peter, that in Parliament you're presented with a motion, and you either vote for that motion in its entirety or you vote against it. That motion was saying, let's take the winter fuel off everybody. And, you know, my view was that it shouldn't come off everybody. It should just come off the wealthiest who didn't need it.
Did you table an amendment?
No, I didn't table an amendment, no. But again, in the run up to it, myself and others were making representations to the government, and my view in the end was that those who didn't need it shouldn't have had it.
And lots of people getting in touch on that, including Peter, who sent me a voice note on this.
Hello, Peter. It's Peter here from Bournemouth. It's all very well for your Labour MP, who came on a little while ago, to say that winter fuel payments, or as it is often argued, that not everybody needs winter fuel payments. But then on the other hand, middle-class parents don't need breakfast clubs for their children. So what's the difference between the two?
It's a very good point. We also spoke to Alistair Carns, the Labour MP and Veterans and People Minister at the Ministry of Defence. He has a long and distinguished military career. Let's remind ourselves what he said.
So I would argue the armed forces are absolutely ready. And they would stand up tomorrow to protect the freedoms that we enjoy, similar to every generation prior to us. What I would say is that the leadership demonstrated by Labour, Keir Starmer and John Healey and the Chief of Defence Staff over the last 3 weeks has been absolutely exemplary. Just last week we had a Chief of Defence Staff meeting where we had 34 chiefs from across sort of the Western world come together to talk about what this force may look like. That was 37 nations represented there. And next week, the momentum just keeps going, and your John Healey will be leading more alongside Keir Starmer. So that's absolutely fantastic.
I also asked the Veterans Minister there about all sorts of things, including benefits for disabled people. And Janet's been in touch on this with a voice note.
I agree with so much of what he said, but when he said that there's no fraud, zero with PIP, those were his words, 0%. We all know of people, I do, that have, let's put it mildly, have exaggerated their claim to quite a degree, and they've received PIP. I'd like to be anonymous because one mustn't say these things. It's sort of, one mustn't suspect people, but I just don't think that's right, that there's no fraud, 0% with the personal independent payment. People stretch the point. Anyway, that was all I wanted to say. Thank you, bye.
Thank you. I think that person was actually just referring to one of the messages that I read out on one of the calls that I had just on that particular issue. Let's hear from Shauna now about Keir Starmer.
Morning, Peter. Shona here. Great show as usual.
Oh my God, Keir Starmer, how sickening is this government? They want to start putting the British people first. He's an absolute disgrace. Stirring the pot with Russia. Who's he to sit there and tell Russia what to do when he can't even protect his own country from these young men of fighting age coming in, laughing at us? We've got to work until we die on the job. Now they're looking at ways of penalising the sick. Why don't they send these criminals back, because that's all they are, who could be Hamas in disguise? This government is an absolute disgrace what it's doing to the country of Britain. And the bigger agenda he's got is to just get the Muslim votes and make us into a third world country. My dad fought for this country, and he would be turning in his grave looking at what they're doing to the people of this country, the British people. It's an absolute disgrace, Peter.
Well, thank you very much, Shona, for your thoughts on that. A number of people getting in touch on all the issues we're talking about today. Jackie says if the DWP was properly investigated, you would find that it would be 100 times worse than the post office scandal. The way it treats our most vulnerable, it's a national scandal. Anne says, I live in Dubrovnik and I speak very little Croatian. Luckily for me, everyone here speaks English, so it's not a problem. I'm slowly learning though. But the difference is I came here self-funded and don't expect any handouts. I use an international doctor that I pay for, and the one time I went to the hospital I took a translator with me just in case. I think if people are living in the UK and expect housing, free medical and handouts, the least they can do is learn English. On the 43% of people not working and claiming benefits, how about looking at cutting their benefits? Says Dorian. Well, I want to thank the top team behind the glass today. Chris Jacobs has been the indefatigable producer, great on the guests today, particularly Tommy Bateson, the assistant producer, Dave Rhodes, the technical operator, Shalape, Elise and Luke Vincent have been the visual producers, and Phil Dave has been the weekend editor as well. Coming up, you're going to hear the championship clash between QPR and title-chasing Leeds United. We'll go round the grounds with Adrian Durham on Game Day Live, followed by Game Day Live phone-in with Jamie O'Hara and Jason Cundy. So lots coming up there. Tomorrow I'm going to be here between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock. We're going to have an interview with Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. If you have any thoughts on what I should ask him, you can let me know. But thank you so much for your company and your comments today. I'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m.